and welcome to another episode of Global Homeroom with Reach the World. I'm your host, Colin Teague. This week, we'll talk about the Fulbright Teachers for Global Classrooms program, an exciting globally focused career development opportunity for K-12 educators, and we'll talk to Brooklyn Elementary School teacher Christina Mesk, who is a Fulbright Teachers for Global Classrooms fellow herself. If you're not familiar, Fulbright is a scholarship program sponsored by the U.S. Department of State that offers opportunities for both U.S. and international students to work and study abroad. Reach the World is a proud partner of Fulbright, which helps connect us with scholars who want to share their experiences abroad with K-12 classrooms. Fulbright also offers an amazing professional learning opportunity for career K-12 educators called the Fulbright Teachers for Global Classrooms program. Teachers who are accepted into this year-long program complete online courses, collaborate with a cohort of like-minded educators, create a global education guide for their local community, and travel abroad to participate in an international exchange during the summer. Without further ado, let's hear from Teachers for Global Classrooms fellow and 4th and 5th grade special education teacher, Christina Mesk.
My name is Christina Mesk, and I'm a 4th and 5th grade special education teacher at PS1 in Brooklyn, New York. In my classroom, it's very important to me that my students see themselves as global citizens.
Hi, Ms. Mesk. Welcome to Global Homeroom.
Hi, Colin.
How are you today?
I'm doing great.
So I know that you are a native New Yorker. You've worked at the same school for most, if not all of your career. And I wanted to ask you, what is your philosophy of education, and what does your school, the community you teach in, and your students mean to you?
Well, the first thing that is really important to know about me as an educator is I believe in a strength-based approach rather than a deficit-based approach. Because I work with students with disabilities, there is this tendency to look at students with disabilities and to name 6 things they can't do. I prefer to look at my students' strengths, their interests, and I like to build from there. And then when I think about global education and what I feel is important about global education is that all teachers are teaching future voters. And we need to empower them. We need to teach them that taking risks is really healthy. And global education, when you use that as a tool in your classroom, that leads the way to empowering students.
You mentioned the importance of global education in your classroom. Can you tell us a little bit about how you began your global education journey as a teacher and where that has taken you today?
What global education is has really been a journey for myself. My father likes to take full credit for me engaging in virtual learning with my students. And it started with me taking an artifact I found in the backyard when I was a kid, a turtle shell, which I still have and I take out every few years to teach with to investigate with my students. And they decided, in order to discover what kind of turtle it had been, they needed to interview my father, who doesn't live all that far away from where I teach, but he didn't want to come to Sunset Park. So we did a video call. And the kids were like, yeah, you're an expert on Miss Mesk and the backyard when she was a kid. And then the following year, I was connected to Reach the World through a colleague of mine who was a Fulbright ETA in Columbia. And he needed to do a service project connected to his work in Columbia. And he used Reach the World to reach that requirement. And that was also a really special experience because he knew my students. I teach my students for 2 years in a row. And so again, this idea of it's not your relationship with a traveler, it's not a lecture, you're not trying to fill empty buckets. It's nurturing this relationship.
And I think that that speaks to the power of virtual exchanges, how even someone like as familiar to you as your father could connect with your classroom and make such a lasting impact. It really just shows the power of connecting your students with different people in their community. And of course, I remember very well your first exchange with Mr. Roth, with your classroom from a few years ago. That was a very memorable experience for all of us, of course, because that's how we met you. Earlier in this episode, I talked a little bit about the Fulbright Teachers for Global Classrooms program. And as a Teacher for Global Classrooms fellow yourself, can you tell us a little bit about the experience from your perspective?
Absolutely. So I was part of the 2020 cohort, and I've done part of the program, but our travel portion has been postponed due to the pandemic. But I did do the first half of the program, which was a graduate course on global education and a symposium in Washington, D.C. I applied for the program at the suggestion of a colleague, and I didn't really think I'd get chosen. I'm a first generation college student, and like most first generation college students, I didn't travel. I didn't do any study abroad because I was so focused on getting my degree. And I also don't have an ear for a language. So I kind of just filled out the application to see, I don't know, what would happen. Worst would be they don't pick me. And I was genuinely surprised when they did. And it was a really wonderful experience, the course, because they exposed you to so much information about what global education is, so many wonderful resources, and it changed, like global education changed in my mind, it started out as like, oh, this is like much like what you wanted as a child, like you wanted to leave the neighborhood, you wanted to see what was out there, to this is also, global education is about that, but it's also about like investigating. It's about learning what different perspectives people have and understanding that humans can live in more than one way, that you can take action on a very local level and have a large like global impact.
I know that for you, your experience with the Fulbright Teachers for Global Classrooms program has actually been, in a way, connected to what you did with Reach the World for some of your semesters doing the program. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So at the time that I was taking the course that goes with the Fulbright Teachers for Global Classrooms, I was partnered with an amazing traveler named Rachel, who was a Fulbright ETA in Colombia. And as part of the work for that course, I had to put together a unit plan on a globalized topic. And I just thought, well, I'm doing all this amazing work with this great Fulbright ETA. So we are going to like combine, that's what I'm going to write about. This is the unit I'm going to design. And it turned into like this full year partnership, where it started just as like a lot of like of a reading comprehension focus, of an investigating the world focus, learning more about our traveler, and then learning more about the people that she was interacting with. And then it went into, well, what do we want to give back? We don't want to just fill children. We want them to do something with their learning. So some of the projects that they did was they created a travel magazine about Rachel and her experience in Colombia as part of our writing unit. They created a Flipgrid where they asked questions to the students that Rachel interviewed for one of her pieces. And then we ended it by creating salt dough maps of Colombia, which was a huge undertaking. And we finished it right before schools were closed. And the students really got to like explore what cartographers do and how cartographers decide what to put on a map. There were some very unique maps. And that like again, like I tied that all into the work I was doing with Fulbright and used a lot of the amazing resources I was getting through the class to support that work.
And I'm sure that you know that some of these incredible activities, like the SALT maps, are one of the many reasons that we at Reach the World just love working with you and your students. Can you tell us about a couple other activities that you've done with your students, whether those are connected to Reach the World or just things that you were doing in other parts of your class?
This year, it's been tough going back into the classroom. I think that it's important for everybody to remember that we're going through like a communal trauma, personal trauma, and vicarious trauma. And it was hard for my students coming back into the classroom. Like it was pretty quiet for the first 2 weeks, and I don't think that had anything to do with like there was only 5 students. They all knew me, but I think everyone was a little just scared. And
Mhm.
eventually, like we all warmed up and things got better and we got used to this new way of learning. Um, but I noticed like my class is super artistic. And I just thought like how they must feel at times like they have no control, because that's how I feel as an adult right now. Um, and so I said, well, what can I do to empower my students to make them feel like they are healing or they're finding a way to heal themselves, but also give back to their community. So we've been learning about the Kindness Rocks movement, which is all over the world. And Kindness Rocks groups are people that paint rocks with positive messages and they hide these rocks for other people to find. So we learned about it through video and text, and we've been making our own kindness rocks. And the students actually really love it. I thought it was just going to be kind of like a one and done thing, but now it's like part of our classroom culture. My students don't go down to the cafeteria at lunch anymore. They have it in the classroom. And so they finish their lunch and they ask me, can I paint a rock, Ms. Mesk? And like, we are just pumping out rocks on a daily basis.
What an incredible way to build a sense of community in your classroom. And I know from conversations I've had with other teachers that that's quite possibly the area that educators are struggling with the most right now during the pandemic, whether their classes are virtual or in person or a combination of the two. And that leads me to my next question. A lot has been said about how difficult this school year and the pandemic as a whole have been for schools, for students, teachers, and parents alike. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience teaching during the pandemic, in particular, teaching in one of the hardest hit neighborhoods in New York City?
When something happens that's traumatic for my students, for our community, like it is very natural for me to stop and take a breath and like observe what's going on. And I think the spring was probably the most difficult part because there was no warning. You know, it was very sudden for our students. So in a digital space, I found that it was like very, very important to give students a safe place to ask questions, um, to let them know that like this isn't you can take a risk, you can ask a question. I might not have the answer to it, but we're allowed to like ask questions, we're allowed to talk about our feelings. um, and I also like used a lot of social emotional like read alouds to help discuss some of the questions they were seeking answers to. um, and I just felt like it was always the most appropriate decision to make would be always to meet my students where they're at. And in the spring, like and at the end of the spring, and I was preparing to come back to the classroom in the fall, my mindset was much the same. Like there are some things that are not going to change. We need to have room in our day to talk about our feelings, to ask questions. We need to make sure that we're meeting children where they're at. And that can be done in a lot of different ways and a lot of different venues. You can give children a greater sense of control by giving them a community service project to focus on. You can address it through read alouds. And that's part of, again, like kind of tying it back to global education. Like global education really is a very interdisciplinary approach, right? Like taking this idea of like building a relationship with another human being or taking action to impact your community and beyond. You can tackle that in a reading lesson, in a writing lesson, in a math lesson, in an arts lesson. And that very much aligns with what I know is best practice as a special educator, that thematic instruction is what helps our students to grow and achieve more. So you can't like really separate like the academics from the social emotional right now. Because you have to always make sure that you are addressing the whole child that's sitting in front of you. And that whole child is more than that child that's there in your classroom. That child is everything that they are living at home as well, everything that they are seeing in their community. And we really have to give ourselves space and time to acknowledge that.
Thank you. I think that's really good advice for all of us who work in education, especially for those of us who are in classrooms or teaching virtually right now. And it really goes along with what we believe in global education, that the social, emotional, and academic sides of learning are inextricably connected, and also that all of the different academic disciplines are inextricably connected by global education.
And I just like, I guess the one thing I would tag on is like just an acknowledgement that this has not been an easy year. Like I have personally struggled with things. And when I say like, when I share that, I don't mean to say this has been easy. You know, this is hard. And I think educators need to also give themselves like a moment to breathe and an understanding that right now, like you're not always going to make the most perfect decision, and to kind of like give yourself room to forgive and make mistakes just like you would of your students.
Thank you so much, Christina, for your time and for your thoughtful answers and advice. And that's all for this week's episode of Global Homeroom with Reach the World. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tune in for another episode in 2 weeks.